Hi, this is Pastor Dave, and welcome to Persistent Hope. We are spending a lot of time talking about the sovereignty of God, the fact that God is supreme and there is no one greater than He is. Believing God is sovereign is actually an act of faith. Trusting that God, what He says about Himself in the Bible is true, is the reason why the Bible defines faith in Hebrews chapter 11 as this: faith is the evidence of things not seen. Faith is the evidence of things not seen. You see, when you look at what's happening, it's easy to doubt that God is either not in charge or that He doesn't care. But faith is the evidence of things not seen. But because of what goes on around us, you'll hear people say this quite often. Listen, if God is a God of love, and then they'll finish that sentence with whatever they're struggling with. For example, if God is a God of love, why do good things happen to bad people? Here's another one. If God is a God of love, why didn't He answer my prayer about my family member? Or this one. If God is a God of love, why didn't He protect me? Why didn't He stop those choices from being made that affected me? All those and so many more are legitimate questions, and they're all hard questions. But the start of the question implies the possibility that God is not love, and that's why these things have happened. God is love. The Bible reminds us in John 3:16 that God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him will not perish, but have everlasting life. God is so loving, He will come in behind bad decisions and bad people and work out His purposes. But remember, there is still the God-given right to choose. And honestly, there are people that make the same wrong decisions over and over again, almost as if they're expecting a different result. Persistent hope is knowing that God created us. He loves us, and He doesn't change. Persistent hope is knowing that God can make beauty out of ashes, that He can restore broken lives, that He can set prisoners free. Jesus was once asked, what was the greatest of all the commandments? And He said, you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. When we make that choice to trust God's love and live for Him, it gives us hope. Even when what's going on around us or what is happening to us is so difficult, we have hope. I have an assignment for you sometime today. Bow your head and say, God, help me put my faith in You today. God, help me put my faith in You today. God bless. Have you ever encountered people that have come into your life and asked that same question that I've just mentioned on the radio? Hey, if God is a God of love, how come? And then they tell you, this is what I'm struggling with. This is why I'm wondering if God loves me. I want to remind you of a couple things. People ask that question because there is pain, there is sorrow, there's frustration. Why didn't God do something? John chapter 11, Jesus has given notice that a friend of his, this has been a family of two sisters and a brother that have been a support to him and his itinerant ministry, always a place to stay, always a meal. And his friend Lazarus is gravely ill, and of course you know the story. Jesus doesn't leave right away, and by the time he gets there to the house, Lazarus has been dead a couple of days. Now, in that culture, when there's loss, there is long-standing grief, unlike we Americans who have a maybe 40-minute funeral at the longest and then have a meal, catch up with friends we've been meaning to catch up with but haven't done so until now. Not the best environment to catch up with them, but hey, hi, how's it going? And then within 2 weeks, all of us who did not experience a loss go on with life, while that person who has had the loss begins to figure out what life looks like with that loss. Well, in that culture, they took their sweet time. Something we could learn about grief. And apparently Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, had been talking among themselves, because they both go to Jesus when he shows up with the disciples. They both go to him at a different time, but say the identical same thing. In fact, if you compare the two verses in John 11, same verse. Simply says this: Jesus, if you had come here, this wouldn't have happened. Jesus, if you had done something, this wouldn't have happened. Here's what I want you to grasp in that when people come to you saying, if God, then why that? First thing we're told, the shortest verse in the Bible, is that while Jesus is there, he weeps. Now why? Jesus knows he's going to bring Lazarus back, and there's going to be shock, but then there's going to be joy. There's going to be a tearful reunion. But in the midst of this sorrow and this grieving, Jesus takes time to grieve with them. First thing to remember when they ask you those questions, how come God did this? How come this? It is not your job to come up with an answer. And I've seen people break into a sweat because they can't answer the question. I mean this gently. I've been a pastor a lot of years. When people come to me with a question, here's what I've learned. They don't really care what I have to say. They are not looking for my wisdom to give them insight. They're looking for someone to mourn with them. I have learned the most powerful two words to give to people at that time. I'm sorry. Not I'm not sorry I don't have the answer, just I'm sorry. And that's what Jesus does. He weeps with them. But then he goes on and he doesn't answer the question. And they made the point, if you've been here, this didn't have to happen to our brother. No, here's what he says. I'm the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. You see what Jesus is saying? This isn't the whole story. Now, you and I wouldn't respond to those people saying, we're the resurrection and life, but we can remind them what Jesus said. When he said at the funeral of a dead guy, he who believes in me will never die, we know he's saying this at a funeral. Obviously, we know in Lazarus' case, he will be resurrected from the dead, but guess what? He's going to die again. In fact, everyone at that funeral has been dead for centuries. So when he says, he who believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live, he's saying there's more to this life than what you're in the middle of. I mourn with you, but I want to encourage you. You just give God your today. Take that pain to him and know that he is what you need. Oh, there'll be days you'll miss that loss. You'll miss that person, but he'll be exactly what you need. You see, that's how we give hope to people. That's how we're not trying to give them the answer. We're just mourning with them and pointing them to Jesus.